This happened in 2015. I drove out to a forest a few hours from home to see an old fire lookout I'd read about. It was the kind of place people wrote about online. Worn photos, a few warnings, a claim that it was okay. It was technically off limits. The structure wasn't maintained and could be unsafe. Still, the posts I found were old. The last was 3 years earlier. I wanted to see it for myself. I parked in a shallow ditch at the side of a gravel road and shouldered my pack. 2 days of gear, a handheld satellite GPS, no marked trail, just cutting through the trees until the signal said I was near. The hike took 4 or 5 hours. The deeper I went, the rougher it got. Branches snagged my jacket. The underbrush thickened. My legs ached by the last hour. When the trees finally opened, I saw the lookout. It stuck up above the tree line. From a distance, it looked worse than it was. Up close, it was worn, but standing. The metal ladder looked solid. The support beams didn't wobble when I pushed them. I climbed up. The ladder creaked with every step, but it held. At the top, the view stole my breath. Forest in every direction. No roads, no houses. It felt impossible to be that far from everything. The lookout itself was small. One room, maybe 150 square feet. A thin, decaying mattress in the corner, a wooden desk, windows across one wall. Everything smelled of dust and old wood. I set my bag down, unrolled my sleeping pad and bag, and cooked a small dinner on my stove. I watched the sun go. The day ended fast. Clouds had rolled in. No moon, no stars. After dark, I sat on the ledge and listened. Nothing but the wind and the soft creak of the tower. About an hour into the night, I saw a light down in the trees. Not a flashlight. It was orange and flickered like a torch or a campfire. It moved slowly under the canopy. Whoever it was walked between trees, not on a trail. It made no sense. There wasn't a path to get here at night, and who carries a torch in 2015? The light disappeared behind a stand of trees, and I stopped watching. 30 minutes passed. The night stayed still. Eventually, the wind turned sharp enough that I went inside to warm up.
When I stepped onto the walkway one last time, someone was standing on the grass below. They looked up at me. For a second, we just watched each other. I called down, "Hello," because I didn't know what else to say. They didn't answer. We stood there, maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Then they raised their hand, a small, almost apologetic wave, and turned back into the trees. They had no visible flashlight by then. It was unnerving, but I convinced myself it was another hiker. Maybe they were checking if the lookout was occupied. Maybe they hesitated because they wanted to respect the place. I told myself things that made sense. I stayed up a while longer, then zipped into my sleeping bag and slept. I don't know how long I slept. I woke to the sound of metal on metal, the ladder outside. Quiet creaks at first, then steady, slow, deliberate steps. It was dark. The building groaned in the wind, but the ladder noise was different. It was human. My heart started before my mind had caught up. I unzipped the bag and grabbed my backpack. I moved on to the ledge. The creaking sped up. I walked toward the ladder opening, then it stopped. I leaned over. No one was on the ladder. Nothing but the forest below. A moment later, footsteps slammed around the far side of the walkway. A dark shape flashed between the window frames. I dropped onto the ladder and climbed down as fast as I could. The metal was slick under my palms. Halfway down, I saw a head at the top of the ladder looking down. I kept going until I hit the ground and ran into the trees. I have no clear memory of the path I took. I remember my flashlight in my hand and my GPS blinking on. I remember the sound of my own breathing. I ran until the trees opened to the road and my car was where I left it in that ditch. I drove away and never looked back. I told no one for months. Later, when I felt safe enough to look at the photos I'd taken, I found something that didn't belong in my head. In one picture I'd taken at sunset, I'd framed the lookout from the ledge. I hadn't meant anything by it. I was just trying to capture the view. In the lower right of the frame, down in the grassy area, there was the figure from the night. He was looking up. His hand was raised. At first, that alone was just a memory confirming what I'd seen. Then I kept scrolling. There was another photo, one I'd taken right before I went to sleep. I'd stood in the doorway and taken a picture of the inside. The mattress, the desk, the windows. I wanted to remember how small the place was.
When I opened that second photo, something about it stopped me cold. Behind the mattress, pressed to the outside of the window, there was a face. Just a face, close to the glass. Not looking in the same direction as the guy outside, this one was turned slightly, eyes fixed straight ahead. You could see the outline of a nose and the whites of the eyes. The window had condensation and streaks. The face was blurry. It was enough. I remembered being alone in the room when I took that photo. I remembered the sound of my own camera shutter. I remembered locking the door. I remembered laying down and falling asleep. I would have seen anyone standing outside the window. I would have heard them. Except the window face was inside the glass, right where someone would stand if they were pressed against the outside looking in. It didn't make sense. I zoomed until the pixels broke apart. The face stayed. It was unmistakable. The angle put it at shoulder height to the mattress. If someone had been there, they would have been right above me as I slept. I checked the metadata on the photos. The timestamp on the interior shot matched the last light outside, exactly when I remembered taking it. The face in the window was in that frame. The exterior shot, showing the person on the ground, was taken later. That meant the face at the glass was there before I fell asleep. Maybe I had been half asleep when I took the photo. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the condensation on the glass had warped a branch into the shape of a face. I told myself all of that. I wanted to. But there are other things I can't explain. My backpack was zipped when I left. When I got home, I found one small compartment had been opened and rummaged through. I put a little emergency lighter in there and a small first aid kit. Both were gone. Nothing else disturbed. No footprints around the car, no sign of anyone following me on the road. I scrubbed through every photo on that card again. I watched every frame for anything I had missed. In the corner of one sunset picture, the one where he is looking up, there was a tiny shape caught in the reflection of the glass. If you blow it up and tilt your head, the shape matches the outline of a hand at the inside of the window, not on the outside, on the inside, near the far left corner. I don't tell this story to suggest ghosts or monsters. I don't know what to call it. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know the ladder creaked and then someone ran. I know there was a face at the glass in a photo I took before I slept. I know someone was below the lookout before I went to bed and then climbing the ladder while I slept. I know my lighter and small supplies were missing when I got home. And there's one more thing. Months later, I found a note tucked into the seam of my sleeping pad when I unpacked it. I must have put the pad away in a hurry after I got home, because I don't know when the note went in there. It was folded small. The paper was thin and browned at the edges. 3 words in pencil, rushed and shaky. Sorry. Sorry. The handwriting looked like the single stroke of someone who didn't want to be seen writing it. No name, no explanation. The lines were pressed so deep you could see the indentations on the other side of the paper. I never went back. I burned the sleeping pad and threw the memory card away. I deleted the photos from my phone and reset the GPS. I told myself that was enough. Sometimes late at night, I think about the face in the window. I try to picture it again in my head, and I can't.
The memory breaks up the way that condensation did. But there is one thing I can't stop thinking about. When he stood at the base and lifted his hand, it wasn't only an acknowledging wave. It was a small, almost apologetic gesture. Like he'd been trying to get in and couldn't. Like he felt bad he'd woken me. Like he wanted me to know he hadn't meant for anything to happen. If that's true, then he was inside the building with me before I even knew. He was close enough to the glass to press his face against it and breathe the same air. He left a note inside my sleeping pad and took a lighter out of my pack. He stood on the ground looking up, and then he climbed the ladder and ran when I moved. I tell this story because I still don't understand the last part. Why climb the ladder if you wanted to be left alone? Why run if you were sorry? Why leave a note and a missing lighter? Why put your hand to the inside of the window before I even closed my eyes? I tried to chalk it up to a person with bad manners. I tried to tell myself it was a prank. I tried to believe it was nothing.
The only other explanation, the one I don't like thinking about, is that there was someone else in the room with me while I slept. Someone who could move from inside the glass to the ladder, who could be below the building and also at the window, whose hand could be inside the reflection at the edge of a photo. If that's true, then he was close enough to touch me. He might have been the last thing I saw before I dropped down the ladder. He might have been the first thing I heard when the ladder creaked. I keep the photo somewhere I can't easily reach. I keep the pad burned in a box in the garage. I keep the lighter out of sight. Most nights I sleep fine. Sometimes I wake up to the smallest sound, the creak of metal in the wind. Sometimes I think I can hear a soft footstep away from the house. Once, on the kitchen counter, I found a single flake of something dark. It could have been soot, it could have been nothing. I don't know what was out there that night. I only know this. The person on the ground, the face at the window, the hand in the reflection, the footsteps on the ladder, they can't all be explained away with logic. They line up too neatly to be coincidence. And the last, strangest detail, a month after I got home, I checked the GPS track I'd recorded that day. The route ended at the lookout. Then, in the file, a second track began at the same place and continued for an hour before stopping. I never recorded a second track. There was only one device with me. On the map, the second track moves in a slow circle around the lookout, close enough that if someone had been walking it, they would have been under the windows most of the time. The timestamps on that phantom track line up exactly with the period I remember waking to the ladder creaking. I have no proof to show you. I have only a burned pad, a missing lighter, a note that says, "Sorry, sorry," and photos with a face at the window. Sometimes I wonder which is worse, that someone was outside my window or that someone was inside it while I slept. Which means the real question is this: if you ever find yourself alone in an empty building in the dark, and you see a light in the trees, and someone looks up at you and raises a hand, what do you do when you wake up and no one is on the ladder? I still don't know the answer. What I do know is this: the face in my photo was always in the right place to watch me sleep.